Good evening. Welcome to the Monday, May 16th, 2011 special meeting. Call to order. We have Mr. Liu, Mrs. Bram, Mrs. Dowd, Dr. Title. I am here. I'm expecting Mrs. Iacono, Mrs. Albans, somewhere in the building. She should be here in a minute. And Mr. Carey should be here soon, and Mr. Fatabean's here. Would you all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. All right. So item number 3 is open working executive session, discussion of proposed recommended budget adjustments for 2011-12. Just a couple of statements I want to make. We obviously have a very difficult decision to make over the next few days, and usually this is a kind of a happy time of year after the budget season with spring, and we can move on to other things, but we still have one more substantial hurdle to get over, unfortunately. This board needs to, and I know we will, we need to reach consensus on this issue that's before us, and we need to, unfortunately, act sooner rather than later because of certain contractual obligations and fairness to people who may be affected by these reductions. We have to let them know. We've had Dr. Title's recommended budget adjustment for about 4 days now. We've obviously had the budget itself for about 4 months, so we are all familiar with that document, or at least we should be familiar. Now, tonight's meeting is open working executive session. There's been some thought from some board members about maybe having a meeting on Thursday of this week, maybe for further discussion. We'll see how we go tonight, and also to have some public comment on the reductions or proposed reductions. So we can talk about that near the end of the meeting, see where we are. The subcommittee, finance subcommittee, has had 2 meetings on this issue, and they had public comment tonight, and I think about 5 or 6 people spoke at the public comment session. I was here for part of it. So what I would like to do first is have Dr. Title explain the budget adjustment sheet, which we all have in front of us. Have them go through that. Then I'm going to go around the table and have board members, if you have any specific questions on the document itself, and we'll go through that. And then what we can do is then go through it again to see whether or not board members have any specific objections to what is on the document. And maybe some board members may have certain suggestions as to where they want to go, whether they want to adopt this, maybe where they want to maybe look at something else. So that's how I intend to run the meeting. And then we'll see where we are after we go through that process. So why don't we start? I'll start, I don't know, Mr. Fatabean, why don't you start first? I'm sorry, with Dr. Title. I forgot what I was saying already. So let's go to Dr. Title first, and then we'll start on this side and work our way around the room. Thank you.
Thank you. I do want to give an overview of the factors that I took into consideration before I brought this document forward for your consideration. I went through this with the subcommittee, but because there are people on the board who are not on the subcommittee, and because, quite frankly, it wasn't televised, this is an opportunity for me to explain the thinking behind it. Then I'll make some brief comments about each item on here. I'll try not to belabor them. This is obviously very important and a very difficult process. The way we built this budget with soaking up every possible low-hanging piece of fruit out there, applying all of our grant money to existing programs, and by looking for all the economies we could before we even brought this forward, means that these budget cuts are going to impact the quality of our school system and they're also going to impact people's lives. These cuts are noticeable. There is no found money. There is no sudden improvement in the insurance fund that we can decide to take. There's no grant money that's been bestowed upon us by the federal or state government that can bail us out of this. And that makes it very, very difficult. This is a group effort. I took a lot of input from a lot of staff on this. Sometimes people gave me input that I didn't take, and sometimes they gave me input that I did, just like as we built the budget. But while this list is mine, many people had input into it. So really, the overall view from my perspective is to do the best we can with the resources that have been allocated, knowing that we put together a budget that, to me, had very little wiggle room in it. I said that I believe that if whatever the amount of the cut was, that approximately 80% of the cut would need to come out of staff. That's about what the percent of our budget is. About 20% of this budget could come out of 20% of this could come off of non-personnel costs, and the list before you is just about that on the number. We did our best to eliminate any positions if they were new to the budget, and if we felt they were not 100% necessary, then we tried to put them down as not being filled, and you'll see that more, for the most part, at the high school level. We did look at what we had for turnover and vacancies, if there was a possible way to not fill a vacancy and still do what we wanted to do, and that would avoid potentially laying somebody off. We did that wherever we could, but sometimes it doesn't work quite right. You get a vacancy in an area you really need to fill, and so you can't take every one of them, but you'll see that in here. I really believe in taking cuts that are really going to result in less expenditures, not phantom cuts where you cut it on paper, but you know you're going to spend the money, and eventually have to take it from somewhere. So if we know we're going to spend the money, then there's no point in taking the cut. All we're doing is fooling ourselves. Obviously, we have some restrictions. We cannot violate our teacher's contract on class load or class size, so obviously that's a factor. I also did, as a priority in this budget, preserve class size wherever possible. Really felt that was a priority, and if we could possibly do that, that did mean making some reductions elsewhere, but class size, I think, is important, and even if it was not something that's contractual. So elementary class size is not contractual, but it was still a priority. Obviously, we can't touch insurance. That was off the table. I didn't want to cut anything that was simply going to create a hole for us in a future budget. So if there's some one-time savings you could take, but the next year you're going to be behind, that's not a good way to do a long range, any kind of budgeting. So I didn't take that. I really believed, as you'd heard me say before in public, that I wanted to avoid taking cuts in the capital of the technology area, that area had been sliced back to the bone, and it looks like an easy cut to take, but I think it does a lot of damage to the school system, and I think we're at the minimum that we need to be at there. And I also believe that we should not cut maintenance projects, that's an area that's been hit hard. Those are very short-sighted cuts, and the history of the cuts that have been taken over the past couple of years show those areas have been really hit hard. To take care of 2 million square feet, we need what we have for maintenance projects, on top of the fact that there are always unknown maintenance activities that have to take place, such as boilers at Ward High School that suddenly decide to flood, or we have other projects out there that we don't know about. And at this point, we have nothing built in to handle those. We also have capital projects that there's no cushion for at all if they go over, and we have to take it out of the maintenance. So really, I think that that needed to stay, and you'll see that. You'll see it. There are some reductions in the maintenance department, but not in the projects. I did go back and look at the audit recommendations again. Was there anything else in that audit that we could take? And there's a couple of places where I was able to do a couple more things from the audit, but a lot of the cuts suggested in the audit, to me, would be too damaging to the school system. To the extent we could share the pain across all the levels of the organization, I attempted to do that. That includes extracurricular, co-curricular activities, central office, all three levels, elementary, middle, high school, but you can't do that perfectly, and for a lot of variety of reasons, it's very difficult with the enrollment increases we have to really do a heck of a lot at the middle school level because of the class size restrictions and the enrollment increases. And enrollment does continue to rise. I also looked at adjusting our budget based on changes in enrollment that have happened from the time we put the budget together to now. So in some cases, that saved us because some of the high school course-taking patterns allow us to not fill some additional positions we thought we needed. But in other cases, unfortunately or fortunately, this means we need to add some positions into the budget. You'll see in here 3 elementary positions. That's because we had anticipated being able to reduce elementary by 6. The enrollment is not cooperating. It continues to rise. Our kindergarten enrollment now is already 10 more than the projection. And right now, if the sort of books closed today and next year came around, we'd have 134 more kids in the school system next year than we have this year, excluding pre-K. So we had to adjust for that, so you'll see that in there. And I really believe in preserving our new program initiatives. I think they're very important. Our elementary staffing model, our new program for gifted and talented, and our new model for pre-K. I think are all critical, and our pre-K is actually saving us money, so that wouldn't really be a budget issue. But, you know, the time has come where we can't simply do everything we're doing, and then every time we want to improve something, we just add on. The times will not permit that. So if you want to move forward on something, it means we have, unfortunately, to retrench on something else we consider to be a less effective use of our resources. So that's pretty much how I got there. If you look at the page that has the 3 pages that have the budget adjustment on there, and there are some brief comments on there, we are taking a reduction at the central office. We have a person called the Instructional Improvement Teacher who really does substantially administrative work, and that will need to be spread among the rest of the central office administrators. Person does all of the CMT work, strategic school profiles, and a host of other responsibilities, and those will have to be distributed to the central office staff. With the reduction that I'm unfortunately suggesting in world language, we can reduce some coordinator time, and the continuing ed coordinator position can be reduced slightly. Most of the high school positions are either course-taking patterns where we thought we'd need new positions, but now that we've gone through painstakingly the high school sign-ups, both headmasters had to sit there while I plowed through every one of them with them, and they're just now recovering from that experience. We really tried to squeeze wherever we could. There may be some impact there on some class sizes. I don't think it's going to be noticeable. There may be some low enrollment electives that don't run, but it won't impact the major sort of end of the sequence courses that we want to do, the APs and the, Spanish 6s and this sort of thing. There are a couple reductions at the alternative high school due to attrition, and we'll do some scrambling there, and a cutbacks in the library media staff where there's a vacancy, and special ed staff reduction. So that's all through attrition, and that's all at the high school. Middle school, paired up with the elementary school, the reduction in the world language in grades 4 and 5 would carry through to grade 6. So Spanish at the middle school would be offered Monday, Wednesday, and Friday versus every day. At the elementary school, skipping down to 18, that would be reduced from 100 minutes a week to 50 minutes a week. The music will be spread out. Right now that says middle school, but we're not sure that's exactly where it's going to go. We're going to be looking at all the staffing. I think this is going to have a minimal impact on our music program. Music had taken probably the blunt of the hits last year, and so I really tried to stay away from that, but the coordinators working with us and with Margaret Mary to minimize that across the system. That's a new position, so music staffing will not be changed for next year under this proposal. The one change on class size, because of the elementary staffing model change, does give some more supports to McKinley. which I think is a better way to approach improvement there, that the McKinley class size maximums would go from 19 and 21 to 21 and 23. The rest of the district is 23 and 25, so this takes them to the midpoint there. So that saves one position. The IIT at Osborne Hill, this is part of the new model. They get extra supports in other areas, but this puts them at the same level as the other Band 3 schools. And there's an elementary special ed vacancy that we're going to squeeze and have other staff cover at that level. So that's the whole certified side, 16.4 positions. On the non-certified side, there's a total of 22.8 positions, which is the staff reductions in this document are 39.2 positions. Now, that doesn't mean 39.2 layoffs. That's positions. Some of them were new, some of them were vacant, but some of them are occupied. At the high school, each library has a secretary. This would make them share a secretary. A receptionist at each high school would be eliminated. Existing staff would cover this on a rotating basis. There's a library paraprofessional in each library. That would be eliminated. The computer labs that are out in the schools would still be available for teachers, but they would not be staffing in there. That's 2 in each high school. We had put an extra custodian in Fairfield Woods Middle School because of the additional square footage. We're going to try to do that with the existing staff. It's going to be tight, at least for the first year. Not all the square footage is coming online right away. We've done the calculations. We think we can do it. It may be some moving around, but it's not a layoff. That's a new position. This was in the audit 27, the media technicians. We do have a very rich staffing model at that level, where every elementary school has a media tech. This would essentially mean that we would be reconfiguring our staff to service technology differently, and they would be sharing media technicians. Just by comparison, each middle school has 1 media technician, and the middle schools are twice or 3 times the size. So this right sizes it a little bit, but we're looking at the whole way we deliver media services in the district. So right now, the cut looks like it's all elementary, but we're going to be looking at a bigger picture than that. Regular education paraprofessionals, the formula in the staffing model was 1 regular ed para at each elementary school plus 0.8 for each kindergarten section. This reduces it to 1 plus 0.6 at every kindergarten section. It ends up being 7.8 FTEs. When I looked at this, and to say the elementary principals, their real priority in this whole thing is the new elementary staffing model, and they're basically willing to absorb hits in other areas to make that happen. That's really what the priority is. So that's all of the staffing. And the last page, I'm going to stop, is, well, there is a salary reduction here. 10.5-month staff positions being reduced, some of them 5 days, some of them by 9 days, some of them by 8 days. Doesn't sound like much, but it adds up to $128,000, which saves jobs. The paraprofessional work year is currently 185 days. This reduces it to 183. So they're still here when the kids are in session, plus 1 more day, but it saves us almost $45,000, which is, I think, a better use of our funds, is to not reduce the workforce any further. This was in the audit, that we should raise lunch prices to offset some more costs. We had taken some of this in the regular budget, but there's some additional custodial costs that we can legitimately take. And to do that, we would need to raise lunch prices across the board by 10 cents. So that would offset the Board of Ed budget, and the food service program would still be in good shape with that. But that's a budget cut to raise lunch prices. I asked Dr. Rosado to take a hit in program implementation of staff development accounts. And of course, the big one, pay to participate in high school sports. The way we calculated this, and in my view, and the extracurriculars are vitally important. I don't diminish them at all. I think they're critical. But to maintain the extensive programs that we have, something has to give. And in lieu of reducing high school sports or even middle school sports in a significant way, a pay to participate of $125 for almost all the sports per student with a $500 family cap will raise the revenue that's there. We did some number crunching with the athletic directors. The sports that have a moderate rental cost would be $175. That's the bowlings of the world. And the skiing and hockey that are the most expensive would be $225. It doesn't nearly begin to pay for the costs of the programs. And we have examples from other districts where when they've implemented this, it's substantially higher. And we do have built into this fee waivers for people who are on free or reduced lunch or have a hardship case. So that's what that's all about. I know that's unpleasant to even consider, but these are the times we're in, unfortunately, where this kind of thing needs to be on the table. We're reducing the capital outlay at the schools. They actually had an increase built in there, so we've removed that. This is non-tech capital outlay, by the way, because I said tech needs to be protected in my view. Eliminating the high school late bus and reducing the middle school late bus from 3 days a week to 2 days a week saves $35,000. At the middle school, extracurricular costs would be reduced by eliminating the girls and boys JV basketball and some intramural hours and activities spread across the 3 middle schools there. And a reduction in clubs and activities at both high school non-sports clubs, $11,000 at each high school. And then maintenance services, some consulting and contracting services get us to the $548. We did have under 39 an additional 1.5 retirees. Now, how does somebody half retire is probably what you're thinking. It's a person who works half-time who's retiring. So that's what that is. So there's a savings we can take there. And then the 3 extra elementary teachers that we need because of our increased enrollment, we need to add that back in to balance it off, and so that comes to our reduction of $2,825,491. I mean, I don't like doing this. I don't like any of these cuts. I was not brought in here by you to make these cuts. I don't want to do this, but my job is to play the hand I'm dealt. It's not pretty, and I really hate to do any of it, but it is what it is. And I'll answer one question before it's even asked because it came up almost immediately in the subcommittee, and that is, were the referendum that's out there successful, what would my recommendations be in terms of restoration? Now, understanding that these are my recommendations and that these recommendations might not even all go forward, but in the hypothetical world of, if these recommendations were accepted, what would I then recommend be put back in? I would recommend that we restore the world language cuts and the pay to participate fees. Those to me were the last ones in that got us from $2 million to $2.8 million. There's still some money left there. We may have to look at some other certified positions, but in my view, if it were up to me, those were the cuts that I would suggest the board put back in, but just like these cuts are the board's, ultimately, so would the restoration be. So with that, I'm going to stop the soliloquy and turn it back to the chair.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Title. I'll start on this side. Questions about this document, and we'll go around. If you have any questions, then after that, we'll go around again to hear specific comments about this document that board members may have. Mr. Fadabian, I'll start with you.
Well, since I attended some of the other meetings, or one of the other meetings at least, I really don't have any questions about the document. I think I understand the document. I understand the difficulty of the cuts. And my comments will be comments, therefore, so I'll wait the second time around. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions about this document, Mr. Carey?
I do, Mr. Chair, and if you'd indulge me, I'd also like to just make a couple comments on,
Sure.
on the process. As sitting through the majority of the subcommittee and listening to this, I think I'm pretty clear on the document. There's a lot of emotion around this type of situation. And one thing that I've noted in talking to former board members and communicating with them over the weekend, and just hearing the conversation in subcommittee, that emotion can start to get charged. We have a difficult situation in our hands. But I will also ask my fellow board members to remember that we're part of a process. And, you know, if we want the other bodies in this town to honor our decisions, I think that we have to also remember and honor theirs, remember to honor theirs. And I know that's a difficult thing at a time like this, but there's been a lot of polarization around this issue, us versus them, school versus taxpayers, parents versus seniors. This is not productive in helping us solve our problems in this community. I've heard throughout this process some very conscientious and thoughtful concerns about our pension fund, our medical reserves, and the direction that taxes are going to be going in this town because of the spikes that are forthcoming. So I think that we hear those. I've heard some less than thoughtful comments, to be honest, as well. But the net sum is that we were told this year the town can't afford that $2.8 million. So what I'm hoping we can do is a couple of things. One is move forward and not backwards on that decision, and be respectful of the other bodies in this town and their decision. And additionally, remind them that I think, as a board, we've heard what they said. And in fact, the prior board and this board, I think, have been very thoughtful in terms of the town budgetary process. I know the prior board initiated the first zero increase in a major school district in the state just a couple of years ago. And that was a very welcome sacrifice that our teachers made at that time and our administrators made at that time to help us try to bridge this economic problem. This board brought the first operational audit idea to the town, and for our $50,000 investment, we found over $800,000 in savings already. I find that to be a pretty good return on investment. I know we're still looking and evaluating that, but I think that has been helpful towards reducing our overall costs. Our new superintendent implemented as close to a zero-based approach to budgeting as this town's ever seen. It's the first budget cycle I've been involved in where I haven't heard the term move forward costs. And I think that, you know, through that process found another $850,000, $900,000 in savings. So I think that, you know, we have some harsh realities to deal with. We had $6.3 million of fixed costs moving forward here. We were granted 4.1, and unfortunately, that's the hand we've been dealt. We want to try to find the way to move forward that's going to create the least damage and allow us to continue to improve achievement and instruction in the district. So those are my comments on that. My question to the document is actually something I didn't see on there, but I thought there might be some potential for savings, and I'm not certain if it's this year, next year, if it's a timing issue. But one of the discussions that we had as we went through the budget in January was specifically around class sizes, and that we do have some carry-on classes. I think a lot of them were foreign language classes at the high school, where because we're, you know, third, fourth year, whatever it might be, Italian, Latin, we have less kids in those classes at Ward. We might have 8 kids at Ward and 12 kids at Ludlow, and I'm just giving that as a hypothetical. Would it be possible for us to use telepresence or distance learning? And what I would envision with that would be if we have a net sum of, let's say, 20 students, 25 students between the two schools, quite literally the teacher teaches at one school one week and the other school the other week, and we would need an intern or someone as a proctor in the other classroom just to make sure there's a handle on things there. I think we have a suspension supervisor at both schools that I'm not sure what else they do, but they might be able to be freed up for a task like that. A room like that could service, I think, 7 sections a day, and there might be some savings to be found there. And my concerns would be, could we implement something like that this year? Would that be something we'd be looking at next year? I know there's special training and professional development the teachers would have to be able to learn to deal with students that aren't physically in the same place as them. But I think that might be something we want to look at in the future, and I wanted to ask the administration what their thoughts were on that potential as a possibility for savings.
I think it has potential, but we're not at a position where we can do that for this fall. I think that it has the potential for us to allow us to offer some low enrollment classes at the high schools. It's not practical for kids to travel back and forth between the high schools. They'd have to give up a whole class period to do that, and most kids have a completely full schedule as it is. So it's possible that we could look for what technology we need and identify what the costs of that would be and what the sources for that might be, and that I think long-term, I think that's an excellent way to get some economies of scale. What it would do would be, if you had 2 small enrollment classes at each high school and you couldn't really, afford them both, you could offer one, and then the kids from both high schools would be able to participate in that. So I think it takes a little more work. It's not going to be practical for this coming fall or this budget cycle. But I agree, and something I raised with both high school headmasters when I was looking at the course-taking patterns.
That's all I have for right now, Ms. Madonna.
Mrs. Alban, do you have any questions about the document?
I'm on the subcommittee, so I've had those questions. I've asked them, I've had them answered. So anyone who's watched this one way or the other may already have that information, so I don't need to repeat it. And when we get to the next round, I do have a question about the process. I can wait for that if you want to wait till then.
Yeah, that's fine. Any questions about the document, Mrs. Iacono?
No, I too am also on the subcommittee, and we had our questions answered and everything vetted there, so thank you.
Okay. And Mrs. Dow, any questions about the document?
Ditto to the other two being on that subcommittee. I've asked all my questions.
Would it be fair to say, while I have you with the microphone, that the consensus of the subcommittee pretty much was, let's present the entire document to the full board for discussion purposes?
To,
You didn't have a consensus, I understand that. So there was no consensus, but I thought, my understanding was
without a consensus per se.
Per
Yeah, I
se.
mean, my understanding was move this document forward to be discussed at full board.
Right, Mrs. Alban?
We took no action.
Correct.
No action, okay.
That is correct.
Very good, okay.
Which, in essence, by taking no action means we're here to discuss this in full.
All right, Mrs. Brand, any questions about the document?
Yes, please. I did have a question because I want to make sure I understand it. When I look at some of the high school deductions where I see .4, .5, .6, and it says new position will not be filled, to me, I see numbers and I see, a deduction for the budget. What I don't understand and I want to fully appreciate is what impact does that have on this high school? Does that mean we're not doing AP? Does it mean we're doing different levels? I just, classes, class offerings, I just want to understand what the, impact is.
Right. There will not be any impact on AP courses. There won't be any impact on what I'll call the culminating course in a sequence that sometimes have had smaller classes. So if you've got an art program and the last class in art, if it's not AP, that would still be offered. Really, when we build the budget, we look at the estimated enrollment in a school and what we think, how the kids are going to sort themselves into taking courses. And so basically, when we actually looked at the actual course-taking patterns, these positions were not needed. However, there could be some impact on electives that are low enrollment electives that will have to be pushed off for a year until we can get enough kids to, sign up for them. I don't have specific numbers on that, and it could be that each department has, minimal impact. But really, we tried to really look at each department, how many classes, how many levels, what we needed, and keeping our class sizes pretty close to where they are, and just wherever we could not take one of these, not add it, we did. So I see the impact as relatively minimal on the high school for these, but I can't say that, every elective with, 10 kids in it will run, because some of them won't going forward into next year. And that will also vary by school, depending on which school, the program of studies is the same at both schools, but the course-taking patterns sometimes differ. So really, what I really asked, the headmasters to do was look wherever you could, where we were adding a position, can we get away with, without doing any real damage, can we get away with not filling it? And they're small fractions, but they add up. And this allows us to not have to take, other cuts. So I see this as a relatively minimal impact. Not impacting AP, most importantly.
One second, did you have Mrs. Albin? I'm sorry, you had a
Just
point of order.
through the chair, could Mrs. Brand highlight which lines, number by number, that she was asking
Sure.
about? It just helps as I'm trying to.
Sure.
Thank you.
When I'm looking at, it's number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7, number 8, number 9, number 10, number 11, and we've actually, I have the same question, because again, I want to appreciate what is also happening when I look at the alternative high school, which is number 12, and then further down, and number 15, which is another, 2 different math, and then the social studies, because they actually tend to have a larger group. So this kind of deduction could potentially have a much profound impact. And again, I'm asking the same question.
Right. Well, first, I just want to be clear, there's a slight difference in the French. That's not a new position. That's an existing position, but the course-taking patterns don't justify the sections for French. So that's slightly different from the English. This was something that the audit asked us to take a look at as well. Was I really thought that we could, in some cases, such as English classes, because we want to maintain that, the writing conferences, make sure we could still maintain that. And that's maintained in here, so that's not changed. But we do have to squeeze a little bit there. The alternative high school, I discussed it with Andrea, who serves as the principal of the high school. She looked at her offerings, believed we could make the program work well with those reductions, trying to do their part. There may be some fewer electives available in social studies at the alternative high school as a result of this, but this is not going to keep kids from graduating from the alternative high school. Those departments have slightly greater staffing levels than some of the other departments, so it brings them in line. So again, trying to pitch in and do their part and squeeze a little bit, but don't think it's going to do any significant damage to the alternative high school.
And relative, again, to the high school positions, we are expecting an increased enrollment going up in high school. So what I see is a decrease in staffing with an increase in enrollment. And again, my concern is, I know we have contractual obligations with that, so are we going to have, how are we going to deal with this?
Well, we're not decreasing the staffing except in French and Chinese. Okay, the rest are keeping the existing staffing in place, right? Because all the rest of those in between,
Right.
5 through 10, were all proposed as new. So we're not actually reducing the staffing in, say, PE, we're keeping it the same, right? So basically, if you look at Chinese as an example, and this actually had come up as one of those discussions when we had our board, the board had a discussion about this in the budget. Looking at what we do in other languages, Chinese level 3 and Chinese level 4, as we often do with upper level languages, combining them into one class, instead of teaching one class with 7 and another class with 7. So we're not going to lose the program. We'll be combining 2 classes into one, but there's an inefficiency here of offering classes with 7 kids. So there would be an increase in class size in Chinese, but you'd be going from 7 to 14. None of this will make us run amok of the class sizes in the contract.
Well, I guess what I was concerned about, if I saw new positions that will not be filled, I was assuming that those new positions were in place because of increased enrollment. So that's why I was
Right.
wondering how you were going to be able to juggle and still be able to provide the same quality that you have to date.
Right, yeah, they were contemplated for increased enrollment. But again, when we looked at the actual courses that the kids actually signed up for, we found we could do without them.
Okay.
I'd love to keep them and let us grow into them, but I just couldn't do
I
it this year. You know,
No, I-
anything we, you know.
I really did want to start to appreciate that
Yep.
a little bit better.
Yep,
At the top, we have a number 1 and number 2 and number 3. The district improvement teacher that works for the district, I know you mentioned CMTs and strategic school profiles. Is that person typically assigned to a location, or is it, I mean, because I know that those things alone don't compromise their job.
no, it's not the whole thing. I'm not doing justice to it. I can have Gary get into it more if we need to, but that person is a central office employee. They're housed here. They have an office 2 doors down from me. And, you know, different from the instruction, and again, instructional improvement teachers were something that the audit asked us to take a look at, and so I did try to take a look at that. This is something that is different from the instructional improvement teachers we have out in the schools who deal directly with kids. Teacher may even be the wrong, you know, word for it. I will say that this person does do a tremendous amount of work, behind the scenes is the wrong word for it, in organizing all of our professional development activities through the school system. So every time we have a day with a professional development day, somebody has to keep track of that, bring all the proposals, make sure it's up, make sure people get credit. It's like back office operations. So that's a big piece of it as well. So there's real job responsibilities there, but basically, we're going to have to eat them. But they are not located in a school. They are a central office employee. I don't know if you want to know more about that job, but I think PD is probably the biggest one. Grants, right? So Title I grant, not the special ed grants. Title I, Title II, Title IV, whichever ones haven't been obliterated by the feds. We still get quite a good chunk of Title I money. So, you know, she has to make sure that everything's filled out correctly, we're spending the money appropriately, we're within the guidelines. No Child Left Behind has a lot of rules that have to be followed. Any other big pieces, Gary? The Perkins grant for the high schools as well. So all of that's going to have to get distributed among the remaining staff.
The other thing was, the other 2, I think one of the persons that spoke up in public comment at the subcommittee, I believe, was Beth Eckert.
Right.
And I think she works at Tomlinson, but does this district portion is like I forget what we called them, like liaison or coordinators?
Coordinator,
Yeah.
right.
And
She's
then-
.4 right now.
And, okay, that helps, because that was the other thing I was wondering, is not necessarily what we have here, but also where we were, so we can see the change. The
Right.
continuing education coordinator, I reduced from 6.6 to 0.5. Is that a person who actually has another job as well as this?
Yes, yes.
And where does that person work?
Well, the continuing education coordinator is how half of her job, well, 6/10 of her job is here in central office. They're located in central office, and they're right in there, that door to the left when you enter. The other part of her job, this particular individual, was .4 of a math resource teacher. So she will shift into a different position next year that is .5, which means she has .5 left to do continuing ed. So that's sort of how it played out. Basically, she'll need to do the work she was doing in 60%, she'll need to do it in 50%. So again, it's squeezing ever so slightly, but there it was, so we took it.
And the next question I have is the same kind of question. It speaks to item number 28, regular education paraprofessionals. Is that all? Are we looking at all of these as part of what's impacting kindergarten? Or is it, I'm just not sure if I understand, it's all elementary schools, but is it,
Yeah,
I want to make sure I understand.
Right.
Are we talking in kindergarten? Are we talking across the board?
well, all the elementary schools, under our new staffing model, have an allocation of paraprofessionals. Okay? And
By building or?
by building.
Or,
By-
so it's not by student population?
It's by building, and based on the number of kindergarten sections determines your formula, because the paraprofessionals spend quite a bit of their time in kindergarten. But Their actual responsibilities are at the discretion of the elementary principal. So basically, the formula that we had established on our new staffing model was that every school would get a base of one regular education paraprofessional plus 0.8 times the number of kindergartens that were anticipated. So, just do the math on that one. So if you have 5 kindergartens, you would get 1 base para and then 0.8 times 5, which is 4. So you get a total of 5 paras. This reduces that slightly. So there's still a substantial para staffing. It's a reduction of 7.8 FTEs spread out among 11 schools. Right? So this is not a per school reduction. This is across all 11 elementary schools. And this is on the regular ed side. We did not touch the special ed paras positions at all.
My next question actually had to do, I think there were a different series of places that we talked about technical support. And since we're taking it away, I wonder how we're filling the hole.
Well, that's right at 27 is really mainly where that is.
Yeah.
Media technicians?
Yes.
All right. The current model is that every elementary school has one media technician, every middle school has one media technician, and the high schools have 1.5 media technicians each to service. And the idea there is to service the computers in that building and the technology in that building. Now, just looking at those ratios, you can see that high schools having 1.5 and elementary schools having 1, is a little bit out of whack there. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to a different model of servicing the technology where we have a help desk centrally located, where people are dispatched from remote locations to service problems as they crop up. Probably a model where technicians are in a geographic area, not necessarily assigned just to one school, but that somebody centrally would sort out the requests, and sometimes we might need to have 2 media techs go to a certain school, or we might even have to ask a middle school media tech to go help out if the problem is real bad, but to have more flexibility with it. This was something that the audit picked up on, and last year there was another audit that was done before about this, and these were always highlighted as a very rich staffing model, and there had to be a different way to do it, and this actually was one of the audit recommendations, was go to more of a help desk mobile way to do it. And so that's how we're planning to do it. And we're working with the staff now to work out the details, particularly if we go to, ironically, a software-based work ticket system for tech, which we don't currently do in a meaningful way. That will really streamline it, really give us data on where our trouble spots are. And quite frankly, I think what's happened is in the elementary schools, some of these folks have been used for a lot of other duties, other than simply working with computers and technology. And, that service is above and beyond. And so, again, the elementary principals, while they love these people, they really want this new elementary staffing model, and they're willing to play ball to make reductions work elsewhere. That's really what it boils down to.
And for now, I think I just have one more after that, and it had to do with the world language. I mentioned it to you, I think, after another meeting that we had. What will be the adjustments then that will be required to the curriculum? And will we still be able to offer an AP class at the high school level? Because to me, it's when you stop something at the bottom, it kind of builds up, and I want to make sure I understand where the kids are going to be able to do at the high school.
There will need to be some adjustment, obviously, in the curriculum content for grades 4, 5, and 6. Right now, we offer all the way up through, World Language 6. AP should not be impacted by this at all. I mean, there are districts that don't start World Language until 7th grade. They have nothing in grades 4 through 6, start in 7th grade and offer AP. So I don't think we're going to have an issue with that. I do think there's going to be some curriculum development and professional development work that'll have to be done with the world language staff to adjust the curriculum. There's no question. It's not like we're going to be able to teach 100 minutes and 50 by talking faster. It's just not going to happen. So we will have to have an adjustment, but I don't think at the top end that you'll see an impact there that's significant.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Liu, do you have any questions about this document?
Thank you, just a few. I missed the part that you were talking about, number 2, the world language grade 4 through 8 coordinator.
Right.
And where that person is exactly, and what, can you just quickly,
Yeah.
I missed something.
Yeah, she presently teaches 60% of her job and is the coordinator 40%.
Okay,
And so this proposal would mean that she would teach 80% and do the coordination 20%.
okay. Thank you. Yeah, number 32, instructional cost savings. You had mentioned something about that. You said Jack or,
Gary, yeah.
I don't know, I didn't get what you said about that.
Which one? Yeah.
Number 32, the 50,000. What, can you explain that?
Yeah, each, in the budget, each program department has program implementation costs. So you have it by department. And it's a substantial amount of money, but it's obviously critical to our program improvement strategy. And we also have some staff development money beyond that that we use for staff development that doesn't fit neatly into a program. And so I asked Gary to go through and basically take a percentage reduction there, and he'll work with each of the program leaders, each of the curriculum leaders, coordinators to identify exactly what those will be, but we'll spread that out over a lot of different content areas so that no one gets hit. But this is something, I'm actually reluctant to do this because, this is the bread and butter of moving forward. But to take a really big hit there, I think would be unwise, but I think we can, snip around the edges here and still move things forward. So that's what I asked him to take.
Thank you. And the last question I had was on 37, the reduction of extracurricular and non-sports costs. What are some of the activities and clubs that usually get cut with that type of 22,000?
Well, that would be 11,000 per high school, and I think that would, we're going to let the high school headmasters determine that based on which clubs or activities are sort of the low enrollment ones at each of their schools. So it may be that there's a club or activity that a ward is really popular and has lots of kids in it, and Mr. Coyne wouldn't want to take that one, but it might be something that isn't as high interest at Ludlow, and Ms. Reel might want to take that one. So we're leaving that up to the high schools to determine which ones would go. So I don't know if there's one that typically would get cut. It would really be kind of market-driven. Do you want more detail on that, or is that good enough?
No, thank you.
Okay.
I have a few questions. On the last page, 40 additional elementary teachers due to increased enrollment. Just, I need to understand that. I mean, I understand the concept, but when we were formulating the budget, we based the amount of teachers on what our projections were going to be. Where's this money coming from? I guess that's my first question. I know it's coming from the budget. But
Right.
Go ahead, but you're taking it from somewhere else?
Well, essentially what we do is here, you'll see that's the only number on the page that doesn't have a negative sign other than the subtotal. So essentially, we've added that in and cut 205, 455's worth of other things to pay for it. Now, some of that's coming out of additional retirees, the 54,000. But basically, if we didn't add this back in, we'd be going into next year knowing we were going to have to hire 3 more elementary teachers and have no way to pay for it. And because the budget's so tight, we can't just assume we're going to have a lot of extra money for not spending it out of certain accounts. So the only way to be sure we could do this is to actually add it back in at this point, count it in our FTEs. And that's the other thing. So we don't show that next year when we have our actuals that we've all of a sudden added 3 FTEs after the budget was done. So it's really a disclosure, sort of transparency kind of a thing. You know, we monitor the enrollment, I think Anna's doing it about every 2 weeks now, as to where we are. And, you know, we knew when we put this budget together that the enrollment at the elementary level was scheduled to go down by 30, was the number. Yet the way the kids distributed themselves, it led to a reduction of 6 teaching positions. That was almost like too good to be true, right? And of course, now the kids have moved in and out of the district. Now that the kindergarten enrollment is firming up and is higher than was predicted. By the way, it bears zero resemblance to birth rates. The kindergarten enrollment is just up, and probably going to go higher. So this is actual as kids have moved in during the year. You know, we did this based on the October 1 numbers, and the practice has been here, and I understand it, is that when we built the budget, we didn't, because people ask this, we did not build in any, what do you call them, reserve? You used to have that?
Right.
Called reserve teachers.
I have that.
And I guess, see, I learned the history here sometimes the hard way, but those were put in, then they always get cut, and then you go into the next year and you're scrambling. And we have less room to scramble now, so there was no reserve, even though we knew we were taking a risk. But if somebody looked at our enrollment sheet in October, those were the number of teachers we would have needed. And so it's basically shifted on us, and the elementary enrollment is not sorting itself out, and now I don't think is going to be quite as, you know, it's not going to drop as much as was anticipated. We're 10 over the projection right now. All the schools have not completed their kindergarten registration yet. Most of them have, but the biggest wild card, and will continue to be over the next couple of months, is McKinley, where families tend to register late, even though you have the official registration. We know there's at least 4 McKinley kindergartners where the parents have come in, taken the paperwork, they're legit, they just haven't returned it. They're not even in here yet. So we don't let them on us like the iron fist of this. You can't count them until the paperwork comes in, right, Anna? Okay, so this number could go from 770 easily to 780, and over the summer to 790. So, yeah, the birth rate's dropping, but guess what? Somehow or other, kids are finding their way to the Fairfield Public Schools. And so this covers us for that, is really what it boils down to. That was a long answer, but I had to make like 3 other points, and you gave me the chance.
That's fine.
Okay.
And then a general question, because we always get this. I know you've probably answered this 25 times over the last 4 months. In this document, why aren't there more, what I would say, administrative cuts or focused on administrative positions?
Well, the short answer is we had the audit look at all that in gory detail, and they compared our administrative staffing to our peers. They compared it to industry standards, and they actually found we were understaffed by 2.5 administrators, and they said to add an additional curriculum leader. So for a whole lot of reasons, the curriculum development and curriculum leaders positions, even if they don't exist in their current form, are going to cost you the amount of money that's in there for the budget. So there's no savings there. There may be a different model we could use with it, but it's not going to save anything. But the central office positions, you know, and were considered by the audit to be understaffed. And frankly, if they really thought there were savings there, it would have been no skin off their nose to put them out there. And now that I've seen what our administrators do on a regular basis, I understand it completely. So it's just not something that's in the interest of the system. There's no standard by which we're overstaffed in that area. In fact, we're understaffed in that area. To carry out the initiatives that I laid out in my district improvement plan, these positions are critical. We are doing a tremendous amount of work on professional development with all the administrative staff. We're all asking them to step up in a lot of ways, and it's going to pay off. But basically, an objective analysis of the administrative staffing in the district said we actually were understaffed. And even though this is not a central office administrator that's cut, this is going to be workload that's going to be distributed. So there was some pain there as well, even though it's not technically an administrator. Almost all the other administrative positions are in schools, you know. I've talked about the house system. That was another one where they talked about administrative. You see, I I really believe the House system is effective for us. I wanted to preserve that in here. I think the dean, housemaster, headmaster system has worked well in this school system for many, many years. Wanted to keep that in place. So we certainly looked at it, but it was not warranted.
Okay, thank you. So we've asked questions about this document. What I want to do next is go back around and have board members comment about whether I don't think anyone's going to like what's on this document, but comment about what their position may be on the proposed budget adjustments. And I'll start with Mr. Fatterby.
Thank you. I guess no one likes budget reductions and the difficulties it entails. I think overall Dr. Tile's done a good job. In fact, a very commendable job in trying to spread out some of the difficulties that is encountered. We're not alone in those difficulties. The federal government has their own budgetary issues, which is coming to surface right now and raising the debt ceiling and perhaps defaulting on their obligations. The state, we just has a substantial tax increase along with some purported wage and benefit concessions from the unions to fill their budgetary gap, as well as the other towns, municipalities, as well as the other Board of Education. So we're not alone in this, but we have to deal with this. One of my concerns is that without some additional meaningful wage and benefit concessions in the unions, we may not be able to avoid some reductions in force and may simply not be able to afford all the employees that we have with the existing budgetary environment and reductions. And I appreciate Dr. Title's efforts to avoid reductions in force and to take a lot of these partial positions and keep a lot of the existing staff, but one of my concerns is whether that is going to be an ongoing ability to do so. So the main issue I have with some of these proposed budget adjustments is in the one that involves play to participate in sports. The Connecticut Constitution mandates that there will always be a free public elementary and secondary schools in Connecticut. When one starts a policy that starts charging, in essence, a tuition to participate in the programs provided at a public school, I don't think it's a good policy. So that is the one in which I believe is the biggest change from what we have done in the past, as well as sets a policy that is not necessarily a good direction. So I would suggest that the superintendent can look back in other savings to find $250,000 somewhere else, perhaps an additional administrative staff cuts or support staff cuts that may not affect instruction, to remove that item from the proposed budget adjustments.
Mr. Carey?
In looking through this document, my frame of reference was, and listening to conversations about the document, my frame of reference still is, what is our goal here? Our goal is to improve instruction in this district. Indeed, I've shared with, I believe, all of you and with the public, all comers who've asked, an op-ed from Bill Gates that came out in early March that basically talks about what you can do in public school districts and how you can bend the cost curve down. And how we can bend the cost curve down is by improving achievement, and the way to improve improving instruction to improve achievement. So I think we're on that path, and we want to try to continue on that path and do the least damage along the way. When I look at things like the new elementary instruction model. I think that that's essential for us to maintain. It gets to the core of the core subjects that our students have to learn to be successful as they move up the ladder. You have students who have reading comprehension problems. By the time they hit 7th, 8th grade, we've got a big problem. And that problem costs us exponentially more throughout the system when we're trying to help those kids catch up at the same time that they're trying to learn very difficult material. So for us to make this investment at the initial levels, I think, is prudent. And as I said earlier, something's got to give. So we want to try to do the least amount of damage possible. I understand that there's going to be concerns about pay to play. I'm not happy about that either. But after crawling through this budget from top to bottom since last January, I don't see where it's going to be possible for us to put pay to play aside without reducing positions further and reducing the program further. I would not be in favor of increasing class size. The only place we can increase class size is at the elementary level because of contractual restrictions that we have at the middle school and high school level, and we can't make those changes right now on the fly. Those are things that we have to look at in the future. But we have a lot of load limits in our contracts, and I don't want to see that burden hit the elementary level. What I heard from the staff during our budget discussions was pretty clear, and if my interpretation of what I heard is wrong, please pipe up, staff, and tell me that I missed it. But we've got this dynamic new program we've been doing for the last 2.5 years at the elementary level, where we are measuring, and we're helping kids that are in creating interventions for kids that are not on IEPs. And this measuring has created a need for a significant amount of interventions and assistance. Simultaneously, we have to reduce our resources to provide that assistance, so it's not a good combination. What I want to try to do is preserve as much of that as possible, again, so that we can get them to the second and third tiers with the tools they need to be able to succeed. So this is a very difficult decision, but in terms of shared sacrifice, you know, I think that we're going to have to decide on something. If we don't want to do the pay-to-play, I'd like to know what it's going to be. And I think that the reason it's there is because it needs to be. So I'm comfortable supporting these changes as proposed, but I'm more than willing to listen to my fellow board members to hear what your arguments are. I know there's a lot of experience in this board. I know when we take something away, it takes a long time to bring it back. That point's been made very clear to me. But I think that we have to do what is best educationally for all the students in our community. And to do that, we have to preserve the things that are necessary to help them grow and achieve. So I think this does the best that we can possibly do based on the situation we're in. And I think we have to be prepared to look at a situation like this in the near future. So we have to start thinking how we're going to continue to deal with this problem, in part, you know, for the next 2 or 3 years. Thank you.
Mrs. Albin?
The list that's before us is not one any of us wants to have to consider. And in a short amount of time, we are going to have to reach some consensus on what the changes will be. While I'm not comfortable with a number of these changes, and for anyone who's followed this discussion up to now and has heard my comments, I'm not pleased with the reduction in world language. First, I would say I'm not pleased with anything from 1 to 40, but obviously something has to be on the list. I am not pleased with world language reductions. As I've said before, when we eliminated world language in the elementary schools in the 70s, it took us 23 years to get them back. If someone can tell me that it's educationally okay, but I don't know that that's, I don't know. I think where we're headed, and not necessarily this board with this process this year, although we may start there. What I think we're headed to in this district, given, as I've also said before, I feel like a broken record, in the last 3 years, we've sustained reductions to our operational cost of nearly $9.3 million. $9,288,000 and change. It's those reductions, which is why we're here tonight, struggling as difficult as this issue is now. There's no rabbit. There's not the crumb on the floor. There's nothing here. So this district is going to reduce services. It's the only way, the only place we can go. And we see that on the list. The item that I will not be able to support, I've said it before and I won't change my mind, is pay to play. Thank you, Mr. Fattabine, for your comments about the Connecticut Constitution. It's a reasonable position to take that we might want to charge students rather than lose things. I understand that. I will not charge taxpayers in Fairfield a supplemental tax because they use a service that should be provided in their tax dollars. If the school system provides the program, and sports are a co-curricular program, make no mistake, they are. I'm looking at a lot of people who've heard me say this, so I hate to repeat myself 1,001 times. But there are students who graduate because they're in those programs. Now, this goes against what I'm just saying. But if we cannot offer these programs without having to charge people a supplemental tax, which I think is totally inappropriate. I really don't want in this town to have to be charged a supplemental tax for something on the town side that might be provided for me. I pay my taxes, and that should be provided, whether it's my child in the school or it's the fire truck coming to my house. Police and safety should not require a supplemental tax. So on the point of pay to play, I've asked Dr. Title what he would do to replace it, and I don't know if my board members will agree with me, and I will respect the final vote on this, but I'd reduce the program, and if it means we have to give up sports at the freshman level and things at the middle school level, as Dr. Title suggested, that's where he would go. Sadly to say, I would go there because I believe we have to fund what we provide. And I'm not going to charge supplemental fees and taxes to people who use our schools. So that's really what I have to say. I reluctantly will support the rest of this recommendation. Should it come to the night when we vote, if it's voted on as a package, I won't vote for the package if pay to play is in it. If I'm given an option to take that out, I will support the other 39 lines. If it has to be voted on line by line, I'll vote on it that way too. Thank you.
Mrs. Iacono?
As I stated at subcommittee meeting, this is certainly not a fun exercise in any way, shape, or form. And I concur with everybody else, given my druthers. There are many things on this list that I would not support, don't want to do. In other areas, I do see opportunities to capitalize on change and maybe make some things better. It's not fun, but, you know, you have to do what you have to do. I, too, am saddened to have to reduce world language. If the referendum that's, the petition that's going through, and if we are able to get a referendum and that we are able to restore $800,000, I would support putting world language back in. I'll go on record with that. I've gone on record on that at subcommittee. I'm not a fan of pay-to-play. I, too, sound like a broken record. Already put it out there, I'm 37 years old. This year's my 20th high school reunion. And when I was in high school, they started pay-to-play as a temporary budget gap measure, and it's still there 20 years later, and it costs more now to participate than it did when I was a kid. So I think once it comes, it stays. If we have to go there, I'd like to see the board put in some kind of mechanism so that we have to revisit it again for the next budget season, so that this doesn't become routine. But at the same time, with those two issues that really pain me the most of these 40 items, Dr. Title offered up an alternative, and the alternative to reducing the world language was increasing class size at the elementary school, and I will not support that. Of the two evils, I would rather take a reduction in the world language program than increase class size. I think we just start down a slippery slope that we'll never get back from. And on pay-to-play, Mr. Fatterbean, I could not agree with you more. I mean, I really, you're right. You're right. I've argued against this for a long time. We're just stuck between a rock and a hard place. And I agree with Mrs. Albin. If it comes down to pay-to-play or eliminate sports, she says eliminate sports. I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is there. And I'm truly struggling with it. I want to say that I will support pay-to-play so that everybody has the opportunity to do something, because we will offer scholarships to those that can't afford it. But there are plenty of students in this district who are not necessarily qualifying outright per se, whose parents are struggling paycheck to paycheck. And it might mean that they don't get to play something. So this is just, it's painful. It's the only way I can describe it. So I don't know. That I'm more interested in hearing what the board has to say. I really would prefer not to eliminate sports, and would be inclined to go with the pay-to-play for 1 year and take it from there. But other than that, I will just repeat what I said at subcommittee, which is that I commend Dr. Title and his staff for doing exactly what they said they would do throughout this entire budget process. You know, Dr. Title was asked by the Board of Selectmen, by the Board of Finance and the RTM, what would happen if you do not receive your full funding request. And he said that this would be a shared sacrifice, 80% personnel, 20% non-personnel, and that is exactly what is sitting before us. And I also think that the board has a credibility issue that we need to deal with. And time again, we get called out for hitting up on maintenance to cover the budget gap, hitting technology to cover the budget gap. And certainly the town bodies, as they are in place right now, don't want us to do that. And they don't believe that we will follow through on what we've said. And here it is. And we're stuck, in my opinion, following through on it, because I don't think maintenance is the place to go. It's just going to cost us more in the future. We stand and we argue and we fight for buildings and projects, and we've watched them all go down in a ball of flames this year. And I think there's unfortunately more of that to come based on what we have budget-wise. And I should probably bite my tongue and not make a political statement, but it is an election year, and if you weren't happy with what happened at the RTM, I suggest you take that out at the polls.
That it?
Yeah, that'll get me in enough trouble for tonight.
It's okay. Mrs. Dow.
Yes. I guess I'll make this brief because I also made all my statements at the two subcommittee meetings, but for those who were not present at those meetings, I can't support the world language cuts or the pay-to-play. And I tossed out some options and some possibilities at the subcommittee meetings, but that's not to be discussed right now. We're going through on just our comments here, and on what we can support, and I cannot support either one of those.
We all agree that no one wants to be here. That said, what I tried to do when I looked at this were a number of things. First, when I went looking at the items that were before us, I also went back in the budget to try and figure out where we were starting so I could better appreciate what we were giving up, because sometimes you lose frame of reference on that, and it is very helpful to do that. The other thing, I kept thinking about what I think is important, and that has to do with student achievement. I can certainly appreciate what Mr. Carey is talking about. I think, however, if we're going to maintain elementary class size, and I do think on this, relatively speaking, that high schools have really taken quite a hit. I do not want to see pay to play. I have 4 children, all participated in various activities, all did sports, not necessarily well, but they did do them. Those were huge learning opportunities for them. They took a lot more than what people might suspect. Yeah, certainly winning, doing something well, cooperation, teamwork, things that I think translate into real life. So I think there's tremendous value in them educationally. I don't want to lose sight. I think we think about it as competition and fun. I think it has its value there as well, because when you work hard and you see improvement, that really helps motivate you. We find that a lot of our students who were at the superintendent's award were not students that just studied all day. They were students who were active in their school, in activities, in sports. It helps engage and pull our students in. So I do think that sports and the after-school programs, but in particular, since we're addressing it, pay-to-play is something that I think is extremely valuable, and I don't really think we can look at it as something that is just an option. I think it is part of high school experience. I think it helps shape our students and how well they're able to cope with a lot of issues at work that they will have to face later on. The other one that I also do not want to relinquish is world language, for very much the same reasons. I think when we look at the program, it isn't just understanding a language, it's also understanding cultures. And again, I know one of the parents spoke to this earlier, but I think the value of that, and I think what our students take when they leave our school system and how they take that appreciation into their adult life, I think is very important. I remember meeting someone years ago, and I'm going back through high school French, which I will tell people, that was a long time ago. But I still found it useful. It helped that much more. It is a piece that we take with us, and I do think our world is getting smaller. I think what we're talking about when we're talking about achievement isn't just test scores. I really think it's learning, and I think that takes place in different ways. And I think world language is so important in our world today in terms of the ramifications, not just what they do with an AP class, but what they take with them the rest of their lives. So those are 2 things that I will not support cutting. Thank you.
Thank you. I also feel very strongly, in fact, I think I can just say that I cannot support cutting world language. As Mrs. Brand was just saying, that at a time when the world is getting smaller, or the way I was looking at it is as the world is expanding, this is something that our children need. They have to have the ability to communicate with other people and other nations and other businesses, and to take this out at this time, I think, is just not the right direction we want to be going in. The other thing that I just really fundamentally do not agree with, as I'm hearing most people feel the same way, is about the pay to participate. And again, we're dealing with public schools. These are schools for everyone. They should not be divided by race or sex or income. And the amazing thing about public schools is that we offer so many things for so many different types of people. And as a child myself who struggled in the beginning in high school, if it wasn't for some of the clubs and the sports that stimulated me, not necessarily to become a sports person, but stimulated me to get excited and invested in this system that was the high school or the education place. It got me motivated to then go and hit the math books and the English books and the things that I found drier. So I specifically don't think pay-to-play, I can't support that at all. I also would be sad, and I would like to strongly levy to also not cut the reduction to extracurricular costs at the middle school, 36 or 37, but I'm not going to be as strong as those, knowing how much we have to balance. But I do have some suggestions about other places we could look. The big one that I'm sure everyone is...
We'll get to that.
Oh, so sorry. We're going to go around again? Okay. Anyway, I think that was it. Thanks.
I'll, on the pay-to-play, I'm kind of like Mrs. Iacono. I don't want to support it, but if it was between pay-to-play and cutting freshman sports, for example, I would vote for pay-to-play. Problem with it is, once you implement it, it's very hard to get rid of. And, you know, I agree with what Mr. Fadabine said and what Mrs. Albin said on that issue. You know, we may say that it's for this year only, but guess what? Next year, when you're going through this process, you know, it'll be in the budget as a pay-to-play item. Maybe not, but, so that's my concern about that. World language, of course, I don't like it, but I could support Dr. Title's recommendation on that because it's not totally eliminating the program. It's a little different than in the 70s when they got rid of world language altogether. I think hopefully we could get it back in a year or 2 or 3, so I would tend to support that. Can I just, before we get into maybe, you know, what some of us may have, and I with respect to recommendations or maybe where we want the central office to look at, it seems like the 2 big items are pay-to-play and world language, and if I had a tally sheet, yes, Mrs. Albin. Go ahead.
Mrs. Zahn is not here, but she did instruct me on that one point to
Go ahead.
speak for her,
Sure.
and that she will not support pay-to-play. I mean, she's not here, but she asked me to do that. I'm sorry, I forgot.
So is the sense of the body on pay-to-play, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm not holding us to that, I'm just trying to get an idea. It's something that Mr. Fadabine, Mrs. Albin, Mrs. Iacono right now, or you're on the fence? Let me show you. Who would, the question is, as it is right now, who would support the pay-to-play as on the budget document? Who would support that? Sure.
Is it that what's on the table right now is we will have pay-to-play or we will eliminate sports, as is Dr. Title's recommendation?
I think it's pay-to-play as whether you support Dr. Title's pay-to-play recommendation, period, meaning you can change your mind later on. I just want to get an idea.
The frame of reference, I think it's important, is to understand what the alternative
Yeah,
is.
I agree.
And there's 2 items, to your point, Mr. Mottola, on the table, one being the world language and one being pay-to-play. Our administrative team has carefully reviewed what they think would be less detrimental. So there's got to be a dollar amount associated
Sure,
with
I
those 2.
understand
And you know, what are the alternatives that we want to...
Well, then, what we can do, I think I've heard from a majority of the board that there's issue with pay-to-play, so maybe the question is to the administration is, if we didn't want to go in that direction, what would you do to make up for that difference?
Right.
Perhaps that's the question that should be asked, and we can get an answer from the administration. I don't know if you can give it to us tonight, but maybe it looks like we're going to have a meeting this week, one night, to continue this discussion. So with everyone's, you know, sense of the body, does the board want to direct Dr. Title to come up with alternatives with respect to pay-to-play? Yes? Yes, okay. And that, we'll see the next time we meet, and you may like those alternatives, you may not like them. Okay.
Can I,
Yes,
may I
Mrs.
ask just a
Iacono.
point, through the chair to Dr. Title? Dr. Title, do you think that, in subcommittee, you answered this question by saying that you would eliminate sports. Do you think that you want to consult with staff, or are you pretty much sure that your recommendation is going to be the elimination of sports, and then you'll have a list of what that is?
Well, to get, if we're staying in the non-personnel and sort of this arena that we're in, because this is a non-personnel cut.
Correct.
Doesn't mean you couldn't cut personnel elsewhere to do this, so there's lots and lots of options here. Seems to me that the purpose of pay-to-play is to allow us to continue to enable these offerings that we do that are quite extensive and getting more and more expensive. And many districts have had to put this in and had a whole kinds of, success with it or not success with it. But at this point, to cover that cost, we would need to eliminate freshman sports, which is about $150,000. And then we would need to take a bite out of either a couple of the high-cost, relatively low enrollment sports at the high school, such as ice hockey, girls and boys, or take a cut at middle school athletics, intramurals. Mostly it's intramurals, staying in the extracurricular realm. Other board members may have other options, but staying within that realm, I think that's the alternative that I see right now, but obviously people have other ideas, and if people don't like that one and want me to come back with even more ideas, I can do that too. But right now in that arena, that's what I see is what you'd have to do to raise that money. That's a significantly lesser of a task than finding the money for world language, which is 5.5 positions and over $400,000.
I have Mr. Fadby and then Mr. Liu.
Thank you.
I guess one of my concerns is Dr. Tile prefaced that if you're looking at non-staffing reductions only to seek that cut. I don't know where that limitation came from, but my intent would be not to have any limitation on that and perhaps look at other support staff cuts that could possibly be made to accommodate that, to come up with that monies. I don't know why that limitation was necessarily included in that scenario.
Well, at this point, we're, under this proposal, eliminating 39 positions as it is. So we're getting to the point where each succeeding position that gets eliminated does even more damage. So certainly we could look in that area. We can look at all kinds of, certainly we can look at that. We can look at support staffing as an option.
Just, Mrs. Iacono wants to speak to that point, then I'll get to Mr. Liu.
Just to that point alone, Dr. Title was very clear with the town bodies that because of the structure of our budget being what it is, 80% of the reduction would be in personnel and 20% would be in non-personnel. So I kind of agree with him in terms of where we need to stay in alignment on that. The second point that I had on that was I don't want to see us get too far off track of where we've sort of, and it is the board's purview. I mean, if we want to go into personnel, we can go into personnel. I just want to be very careful about what we do there, because something that we need to keep in mind is job loss and reductions in workforce. And the unemployment insurance is carried on the town side of the budget. And I don't know, and I could very easily say this is not our problem, but we're all one town and we are all Fairfield. And ultimately this affects all of us. I don't know that they're carrying enough unemployment insurance on the town side to cover even more staff reductions. In fact, I'm fairly certain they're not. But I just don't want to see more people lose their jobs. That's all. But it's more, my point to your point was more about the 80-20 split that I'm hoping, and I'm only one person in 9, that we stick more with that. It's certainly the board's purview to go somewhere else.
Did you want to comment on that? And then
I just
Mr.
want
Liu.
to comment. I don't want to see people lose their jobs either. But this is not about, this is about providing the best education system Fairfield can based on the budget we're given, and not necessarily about just keeping Board of Ed employees' jobs. If we can accommodate a good education, or if we can provide an educational system to the public, for which it is for the benefit of the public, and we have to eliminate some jobs in order to accomplish that, then unfortunately, like a lot of companies and industries and the government overall, it has to happen. Look at the state. The state handed out 4,500 notices, unless there are wage and benefit concessions. The state didn't want to do that either. Nobody wants to do that. But if that's what it takes to accomplish your goals, that's what it takes. And I don't want to have anyone lose their job, certainly. But we're in a situation where we have to make a budgetary shortfall. And there are some difficult choices. And if it's a trade-off between the public interest and the employee interest, my guess is our mandate is to do the public interest.
Mr. Liu?
Thank you. With all due respect, Mr. Mottola, I think just by accident, you know, we've gotten off, we've missed a step here. I mean, we've asked Dr. Title to sort of already comment on what he would do without hearing the other board members' suggestions of where money could be found. And I don't want to put Dr. Title in a difficult position of having to guess on what he would do when possibly there are some other suggestions out there. So I think we need to get back to what are some of the suggestions from the other board members before we start clamping down on and making him back into a corner there.
Want to start?
I just wanted to make a statement to Mr. Lewis, and that is, yeah, I'd like to see other options, because to me, to cut sports in order to save sports is not the answer. So I want to, yeah, have the discussion about other options, because basically, if we're cutting out freshman sports and some actual activity, you know, sport activities, that defeats the purpose, I mean, of the whole argument of not having pay to play in the first place. So, yeah, I think we need to toss that around.
So we can, that's fine. Why don't we start with Mr. Liu and we'll work around.
Thank you, Mr. Mottola. So the one that I don't think should be any surprise to anybody is $350,000 for grandfathering. I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but it is imperative at this particular time that we look at everything and put everything on the table, especially when you've got $2.8 million staring us in the face. I don't think at any time, if we had the money, that grandfathering is a reasonable and good idea. But if I have to weigh it against losing programs, I would say that I think grandfathering is something that needs to go. And I prefer to see my kids get the proper programs than to worry about the transportation or some of the needs of being, I know that step going into a different school can be difficult, but I think with programming, and I also think that we're having 8 schools that are changing hands here, no one's going to be in the minority there. I think it's something we have to look at, and I also think we have to look at it in terms of how it's going to affect next year's budget, because we know this is not going to get any easier, which would save us another $350,000. So that's one idea. The other idea is to look at I know, Dr. Title, you talked about professional staff development being important, and I can understand its importance, but I also wonder if, at a time when we're trying to just get by, if maintaining is more necessary. So I would say if we could look at, I think it's on pages 26 or 126 or 124, you've got 60 instructional services. Number 321, professional services at $399,617. I'm not going to tell you how much, but I think if we can shave some of that, I think it could be helpful. I would say number 64, business services. I guess a question to you, Dr. Title, is do we need this? We have the munis right now. Is it important that we, well, I won't say important, but is this something we could maybe sacrifice the $6,000 there? Number 65. No, that's not a very
I'm
big
sorry,
one.
just a point of information, Mr. Liu, would you mind, you're citing 64 business services, but could you cite the number for the line item that you wanted to
Oh,
cut?
sure, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think it's 305 professional services. That's what I
Okay.
wrote down for $6,000.
Okay, thank you.
And number 66, personal services, line 321, again, professional services at $285,000. You know, maybe we could shave some off there. And again, these are just suggestions. The other question that is difficult to ask, but I think we need to consider it, is central office administrators not part of collective bargaining. I respect that they have taken a wage hold the previous year, but I'm wondering if there can be at least, we can look at shaving some of those, maybe in half. I think it's something we should consider, especially given that we don't talk a lot
I'm
about-
sorry to interrupt, Mr. Liu. Shave what in half? Can you just be more?
Well, I'm not going to go, basically, the positions are all over the place, but I'm going to ask Dr. Title to look at central office administration and where we have a non-collective bargaining, non-union administrators, if wage increases can be,
A wage increases?
Yes.
Okay.
can be looked at and shaved. And I would also say that if we should take a look at the central office benefit insurance packages and possibly look at getting them down closer to the line of administrators or teachers, again, so that there is more of a balance in terms of shared cost. You know, the thing that I think is most puzzling on this, and I don't necessarily have the answer, I think the elementary staff banding staffing model makes a lot of sense, but I do question it in light of taking out world language. And I haven't really answered that for myself yet, but I think it's something we have to look at, because I just cannot see taking out world language at this time. So those are some suggestions and ideas. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Brand?
Thank you. I had a question for clarification. I'm looking at page 165 in our budget book with the elementary staffing model, and it has a net increase of 8.3. My question is the 8.3 that we added, and then we're having a deduction on your proposal, Dr. Title, for staff reductions. That's based with an increase, though, of 8.3, correct?
All of the staffing model costs on that page are all in the budget.
Okay, I just want to make sure that I think that's part of where I'm going with this, is I'd rather see us maintain what we have. Mr. Liu's looking at it from staff development. I'm sort of looking at it from a different perspective. One of the things I have a concern about is the sustainability of actually bringing in more staff. And if we have staff development, and we do have, I think, a very abundant amount of funding that is going into it, which I think is valuable. But I'd be more inclined to look at some of those changes in terms of staff development and teaching our own staff how to do these things, as opposed to adding more staff to do these things. Our class sizes are good. They're not, and I want to maintain them. I don't want to take that away. So, though I appreciate the intent of the staffing model, if we're looking at language arts and math and science, I'd actually like to be able to have this be sustainable and our staff to be able to incorporate it, and I think the way we could look at that is through staff development as opposed to doing it this way. That clearly would yield $418,972, which will help us with Play to Pay. It also helps with the language arts program that I really, as I said before, I think is valuable. The other thing I had in terms of making these decisions, it was something Mrs. Albin referenced. What we're looking at is a dollar amount versus another dollar here at the table isn't necessarily a one-to-one correspondence. And I think the reason it's not, there are staffing issues that when we have a more favorable budget, we can look at. But we also know there are some decisions that if we make them right now, that the implications are far-reaching, that we know from experience in this district as well as other locations that, as Mrs. Iacono said, when you lose something, you don't get it back. And that gives me pause. If we lose some staff, do I think we can put it back? Yes, because we have done that in the past. But it's a lot harder to put back some of these pieces. I don't look at education as a piecemeal kind of thing where I offer this service, but I don't offer this service, and I think it is unfair to put a burden on the student to pay. So I also, with foreign language, would like to translate some of that. I tried trying to find other savings, to be very honest with you, and I'm struggling. And it's not because of choice, and I fully do respect the board's decision. It was their decision to move forward with grandfathering, but I think now is the time we need to take a step back because it's, if I recall, $432,000. Excuse me, thank you, I switched. $342,000. It's not, and I mean it most sincerely, it's not something I just said, oh gee, I can't wait to do that. It's not. I know some people feel differently about it, but we're just making such, I feel, long-lasting decisions here that I'd like to look at that again and revisit that to see if it's a one-shot thing. And it's please, it's not because of any, it isn't. It's most sincerely because I look at what we're sacrificing, and it really concerns me.
Mr. Matul, just a point of clarification, if I may, through the chair. The member mentioned earlier a savings of $418,000 for something. Can you help me understand, Mrs. Brand?
Page 165.
Where that's coming from, as I just wasn't tracking on that.
So if I understand what you're saying, Mrs. Brand, is you want to go forward with what Dr. Title wants to go forward with, but with the existing staff, or you want to not do what Dr. Title wants to do on the elementary staff model?
I don't want to do the elementary staff model. I'd rather pursue it with professional development rather than with additional staff. So what I'm suggesting is the same kind of improvement, but not adding staff to do it.
Thank you.
Okay,
Go
I just
ahead.
jump in on that
Sure.
now and make myself very clear about this. This is like a huge priority. We are willing to give up other things we think are less important. This cannot be done with staff development. We're talking about additional staff to directly service kids. There are huge, in my view, reductions in other areas of elementary to get this in, because for the long run, this will work. So I just want, if I can't be any clearer about it, people can disagree. And that's where the principals are, that's where the director of elementary education is, and that's where I am. This would be the last thing I put on the table. So I just want to, I could talk about some of the other things later, but that one's building up, so I just wanted to jump in before I have steam coming out of my ears, and that would be an ugly thing for everybody to see. So virtual steam was just coming out of my ears.
And then the other, just so I understand on the grandfathering is, so we wouldn't have any grandfathering, and a child going into 7th grade next year who might be at a Holland Hill kid who's at Tomlinson would then
Correct.
would go to Fairfield Woods.
I think that also.
The 8th grader too, right?
Yeah, I've also thought about this because I knew when we were looking at the number of buses, the concern we were going to have with, quite frankly, how the buses we were going to make it onto the sites, because we're going to have a dilemma that the sites can't even handle the buses they have now.
All right, so thank you for clarifying that. Mrs. Dow's turn.
Okay, I stated these earlier today, but I will state them again for those who weren't there. Basically, I'm in agreement with Mr. Liu and Mrs. Brand. I had, sorry to disagree, Dr. Title, but I did put the elementary school model on my list, thinking that, yes, I know it's important, but we don't have the money for new initiatives right now, this year. I also had professional development, as Mr. Liu suggested, and Mrs. Brand on the list, although I was told the 285 one in our earlier meeting this afternoon was something that was needed by contract.
Right.
So that would then...
It's not an
plus
option.
the 285 would be off the table. But I also had looked at the 399 line. I had mentioned for central office the insurance benefits. I did not go to wage increases, just looked at insurance benefits. Had mentioned grandfathering, and I also disagree with maintenance, taking it off, but I had come up with a few options. Like I said, I will not go with anything like roof and windows that would allow water to seep into the building so that we'd have another McKinley. But I did mention a few line items where we can save. There was one for soundproofing panels in Bird Gym, and yes, that sounds great, but for $30,000, I think that would be necessary somewhere else right now. I had mentioned painting, and people said they didn't want to, have it should be painted more often, and that we don't want chipped walls, but I'd rather have students playing sports and learning foreign language and have painting, chipping for now, for this year anyway. So that was $50,000. There were some other ones here. Oh, installing a new ceiling system. I'm not sure what that was, but also lights in the kitchen. It did say it was repair and replacement for $25,000. What I was doing is I was looking at lines that just said repair and replacement and did not say safety, because I do not want to touch anything that has to do with safety. There are some other options, though, that said replacing doors, that didn't say it was for safety, but just said for repair replacement, again at like $25,000. So I just thought there were some things that we might, I don't want to do it either. I lived through the McKinley, which is why I'm saying I won't touch roof or windows, but, I can't support the pay for play. I can't support cutting world language, so we have to find the money somewhere, and as we've all said, it's hard. So these are places that I, too, would find it hard to cut, but have to in order to put the other two back in.
Thank you. On that, Dr. Title, I would ask, and I agree with Mrs. Dow on the maintenance. I would ask that you and Mr. Cullen take a look at some of these items. I know they're necessary, don't get me wrong. Do we need to do them for this coming budget cycle? And I certainly respect what you've done here so far. But I think you need to take a look at that. And some of the items at Fairfield, Ludlow, and Fairfield Ward and Tomlinson that deal with replacing doors, things of that nature. I think there could be some savings there that might offset the pay to play. So I would ask that you take a look at that. And the only reason why I'm speaking now is because Mrs. Dow mentioned that. I'll move on to Mrs. Iacono.
I don't have anything. I've been through this budget book upside down, left, sideways, everywhere. I could hit some maintenance areas, but I think it's a really bad idea. If you want my suggestions, I'll give them to you, but I think we're heading off down a really bad path. And I think it's time that we put our money where our mouth is. We said we weren't going to go here, and I just don't think we should go here. You don't get something for nothing. But, soundproofing the panels in the gymnasium, $30,000. Installing a new stove and sink in the faculty lounge, $3,500. Installing double doors in stairwell number 7 at Roger Ludlow Middle School, $15,000. Tomlinson, major maintenance, replace the doors, exterior entry to gymnasium, replace interior gym doors, which are quite sad, by the way, if you've seen them, $25,000. Fairfield Ludlow, replace auditorium exit doors, $7,500. Fairfield Ward, replace exterior doors by the tennis courts, which I think I've heard that now 3 years in a row, $45,000. And all painting projects in the schools, $50,000. That comes to $176,000. If you want to go backwards and hit those types of things, those would be the only things I would entertain talking about, but they're not anything that I'm willing to put on the table. I think it's a step in a major wrong direction. I think it's very short-sighted. I don't think it's what we should be doing. We've made major mistakes in this area before, and we're really, really falling behind in our infrastructure. I'm telling you, where I grew up, they did not invest in their infrastructure, and it is costing them big time to catch up, and it just sets them behind. I don't have anything else to offer up in that regard. I will absolutely positively not pull the rug out from grandfathering. We had 7 people vote in favor of that. I don't think this is an issue we should be revisiting. Just to Mr. Liu's point, we already addressed professional development in subcommittee, and it cannot be done. Regarding the central office benefit package, through the chair to Dr. Title, was your staff able to come up with a number on what the differential was there? Do they have?
I don't know, Bonnie.
You're
They're still
okay.
working on it.
Okay.
But
thank
also, my understanding is that in some cases, and I wasn't here, those benefit packages were maintained because central office staff took less of a raise than the corresponding unit they might be attached to.
you. Right.
So there were increases that were given, say, to the administrator's bargaining unit that central office did not get. And so that's sort of part of negotiations with, when a union gets an increase, they often go up with their copay,
Right.
right? So, retroactively, we're going to go back, we want to guarantee the central office administrators the same 3.9% that all the other administrators are getting next year. I'm sure that'd be, it's a whole package thing there. So we'll look it up. But we also want to look up what the differences have been over the years in raises between the administrators, the unionized administrators and the central office, because there has been a difference there because the central office administrators have no leverage,
Right. Well, that's.
right? So I just
Yeah.
think this could be,
No,
this is a major research project that's not worth a lot of bucks, so.
Right. Well, that was going to be my other point, and I appreciate you looking into it, but
And
we're
we'll look
really-
into it, but it just came up tonight at,
Yep. No,
whatever,
and we're only talking
6
about.
o'clock.
And we're only talking about 7 people.
Right.
So it's not going to be a huge.
right.
A
But
huge
you do
savings.
control the central office raises, pretty much, so.
No, I
You know.
hear you. I hear you, and I understand the call to look at it. I truly do.
Right.
And additionally, I don't know if anybody remembers when we started this whole entire budget process, but there was a line of parents like wrapped around the room coming out and supporting the elementary school model, and I beg to differ. Reading, writing, arithmetic, learning math, understanding science are core curriculum issues, and I wholeheartedly support the elementary school model. I will not vote for any change in that.
Mrs. Albin?
I said earlier that I would not make recommendations where we could find money in order to make changes within this recommendation. I felt it was more appropriate that I speak to the items I couldn't support and ask the administration to give me the options that I could consider instead of it. I still believe that's the better approach. Having listened to the discussion here from board members, if because of this discussion, the superintendent brings back maybe some small maintenance projects for replacing other items here, I could consider those. But I'll look for Dr. Title's recommendations. He knows my big problem. I'm sure everyone in the room does. And I heard one comment from somebody from the public at our subcommittee meeting earlier tonight, which I have a question about, if I may, through the chair to Dr. Title. There was a question asked about our non-union staff district-wide, and whether or not I know, again, we're probably talking about small sums of money, but it's one of those things, if there's a loose penny on the floor, I'm giving it to you to pay for something. There was a question asked if the non-union employees have taken a 0 in any of the recent years, as the bargaining units did. And not just the teachers and administrators did that, for the record, but our other bargaining units did that to help us as well, and they deserve that credit. The question, and then, of course, the question followed with looking at their compensation, their benefits packages. But it's,
Yes,
did they take a 0?
last year. Last fiscal year.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
Everybody took a 0.
All right, thank you.
Just
I'm not
as a-
talking about the department heads and administration.
No, I'm talking about the
I'm talking
non-union
about- okay,
people.
that's fine. Just
Everybody
wanted to be
across the
clear.
board.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Mr. Carey?
So I still haven't heard a reason, I want to say reason, I still haven't heard something that I would prefer to do over pay-to-play, just to update you on my minute-to-minute position on that. I am concerned when we get into this discussion, if we're going to start picking off grades or sports, we're going to create divisiveness within our own parent community again. You know, I'd be willing to look at and investigate the middle school level, but correct me if I'm wrong. I'll say to the chair, to the staff, Dr. Title, I don't believe we have formal PE in the middle school level. Do we have formal PE?
Say that again?
What's the formal PE program in the middle school level?
We have one.
And there's no, let me rephrase it. We don't have formal recess in the middle school.
Right.
So intramurals, to a certain extent, are other extracurricular activity where there's some physical activity beyond PE. Is that a reasonable? And in some cases they are, other cases are not. They're clubs, they're.
Right. I don't think there's many middle schools anywhere that have recess.
The
It's
extra, yeah.
PE class and then
PE
after-school
class
activities.
covers it,
Yeah.
and so we're kind of compressing down the physical activity as we hit this age, and we're amping up the academics, and there is a possibility for some more extracurricular physical exertion, depending on the choice you make. Okay.
Right.
That's where I was going with that. At the elementary level, most of the after-school activities are programmed through the PTAs and paid for by the parents.
That's correct.
Is a model like that creeping up into the middle school level versus intramurals practical? Is that a bad idea? Would that save us some of that money?
Well, you could do pay to participate, right?
Well,
You like it so much at the high school.
Right.
No, but I mean, you know, the middle school has activities, intramurals, but also clubs and activities, which by statute and by, you know, challenge or whatever, boards of education are allowed to charge for. You may not want to do it, but it's allowable. Districts do it. So, sure, could you, you know, essentially that would be the, right, is that what you're getting at? Or did
I mean, would that be
misread?
material? I mean, at this point, again, I'm not really comfortable just wiping out freshman sports. I'm not comfortable saying, this one qualifies, this one doesn't, right? So,
Right.
from that
Well, yeah, I mean, you could
perspective,
broaden that. I mean, right now, it doesn't sound like people even like the concept at a contained level. So, yeah, I mean, you could broaden it out to other co-curricular activities. My thinking was that this would be a start, and this is where it most commonly occurs in the world. But there are places that have activity fees for everything, and there are, Darien, for example, and there are places that have pay-to-participate fees at the middle school for intramurals and at the high school as well. So the model could be developed, and I could, you know, project some savings there, but at this point, it sounds like the whole concept is not a big winner, so I don't know if I want to spend my time coming up with another concept that no one's going to like,
well,
or
again,
few are going to like.
I've yet to hear a replacement that
Right.
is
I
less
understand,
damaging, so
but the
I'm
ans-
still on it.
Yeah, but the answer is yes, you could do a, you could do a similar model at, say, a lower, usually the middle school pay to participates are a lower price point. Typically, that might be $50 or something for the intramurals, something along those lines.
Okay. Well, regarding some of the other suggestions from board members, I understand the concern about world language, I do. And I'd like to see us moving our world language down the grade. As a matter of fact, prior to becoming a board member, I had a pretty in-depth discussion with Dr. Clark about that. Wouldn't it be great if we can get world language starting like at first grade? And, you know, is there time in the day for that, and does that make sense? Yes. But we're here to help make decisions in balance. And what I heard clearly at our deliberations in terms of the elementary staffing model was that we're doing all this testing through SRBI and SBI. SRBI, Mrs. Palin? SRBI.
Got it.
I'm having trouble with my acronyms tonight. And the result of that testing is many more students in need and at risk than we anticipated. And those students are at risk with core curricular issues: language arts, reading comprehension, math, science. And quite frankly, if we don't get them where they need to be in those earlier grades, world language isn't really going to be much of a benefit to them if they can't communicate and comprehend in English. And this is the type of decisions that we're forced to make at this point. So I'd really think that at some point, I understand this board has opinions, I do respect and want to hear them all, but I kind of equate it like this. We sit in the crowd when we go to the other board meetings, right? And we hear some wild things. And because we study these board books so carefully and we're so involved and we know so much about it, we're like, well, that's crazy. That person really is uninformed. I heard one parent stand up and say the reason we were asking for $40,000 to surface the playground in McKinley was because kids were getting wood chips in their pockets. And you shake your head. And that's a person who generally had a concern about their taxes, and they were sincere and they were respectful, but they were misinformed. And, you know, the reason, by the way, we're surfacing that is because we have kids with special needs who need to be able to actually access the playground, and they can't access it on wood chips. They need a flat surface to start so they can do their educational program. It's a clarification. But I can't imagine what these folks over here are thinking sometimes when we speak, because we know about 100% of what they have to deal with every day. And at some point, we're going to have to rely on our experts and their expertise when it comes to some of these critical decisions. If we're being told by our superintendent, who we're paying a lot of money for his expertise, and his staff and his principals, that this is key, for us to undo that decision and put something else in because we think it's better, I think that's a dangerous precedent, and I think we have to be very careful about that. I think that we have to be thoughtful. I think that we can look at other things here. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but there's a reason the things that are before us. So this particular one I'm not willing to compromise on. I think it's too important. I don't think we've done anything meaningful in the last 10 to 15 years at the elementary level, and I think that we really need to catch these kids earlier so that we can, in the future, save a lot of money in our investment and try to keep them up and catch them up at the upper levels. So that's one. Regarding the busing and the grandfathering, Groundhog Day, I'll remind the board there was a reason why we had a vote for this. And there's a few other realities that we have to deal with here. It is May. Our staff has prepared everyone for where they're going to be next year. I would ask that, through the chair to the superintendent or a member of his staff, has anyone chosen to not take advantage of the grandfathering that we've offered this year?
No, everybody took it.
Okay, so 100% of the parents who have kids in 6th and 7th grade right now agree, right? That this is the
Right.
best way to go.
And we've completely transitioned everybody